You edit this, of course, before you do whatever, right? You edit this, of course, before you do whatever, right? You edit this, of course, before you do whatever, right? C'est la vie. That's my life. Oh God, do I get to see this? I'm speechless. I think I've revealed all of me.
That's the news.
And I really don't have room for things. So what happens is I buy stuff and toss it into the closet. Then of course I forget what I bought and where I put it. And either can never find it or replace it, or just can never find it.
I have
64 pairs of shoes.
And you?
That doesn't count sneakers. I have a couple of pairs of sneakers. But, you know, they're beautiful. Most of them are high. Shut it off. Shut it off. Shut it off.
Why? All this gets clipped in.
Oh, does it? My mother was Elsie Bergman before she was married. My father was Eliezer Carter before or after the name change.
Oh, before the name change.
Before the name change, it was Eliezer Cohen.
Explain the name change.
Explain the name change. When my brother graduated from college, and he graduated from CCNY, and he was a chemical engineer, and he wanted to go on to graduate school. It was difficult to get into graduate school, and we had mishpacha, extended family, who said that if the name were changed, it would be easier to get into one of the first-rate schools. So, of course, since my father adored my brother, actually, my brother was a Jewish prince, my father went along with it, and I don't know how they came upon the name of Carter. I think the original name way back when in Russia meant a carrier or an expressman or a driver of a truck, and because of that, Carter can be a carter, you know, a carter of materials, etc. That may be how Air Force, and went through World War II as subsequently wound up being a major and then a lieutenant colonel in the 5th Air Force. And I do believe that he wound up being an intelligence officer.
As Cohen?
I was born as Cohen.
And so you...
The name was changed before I was 13, under the age of 13.
Were you bat mitzvah?
No, never.
Did you go to
because girls didn't count. My brother had a beautiful bar mitzvah. And in those days, and the bar mitzvah was in my grandmother's shul, which was a South 5th Street shul. In those days, at a bar mitzvah, they used to throw bags of candies. I had such a wonderful time collecting all the bags, eating all the candies. No, but girls didn't count, and they didn't happen. And because of that, my father emigrated to America, presumably to the uncle who lived in the Bronx, and brought his two brothers over. The third brother went to Argentina. So we have family in Argentina, although we've lost touch with them. And their name was Cohen. I remember my Aunt Mary in Argentina, to me, was such an exotic aunt. She lived in Baltimore. Everybody else I knew lived in Brooklyn or the Bronx or Manhattan. And she lived in Baltimore. And whenever she came to visit, I remember she used to sleep in the bed with me. And I loved her so much. And
who was she related to in the family?
She was my mother's sister, and she was married to a man called Philip Rosner, and had 3 children. A son, Sam Rosner, who wound up being, I think he was a major in the Air Force. The handsomest guy I ever in my life saw. He was about 6'4", with shoulders about this wide and a waist about this wide. Absolutely gorgeous. Sadly, he's still alive, but he no longer is as sexy looking or as handsome.
What did your father do for a living?
My father was he was in the men's clothing business, and he was a cutter. And a cutter was a very important factor in any business, because they're the ones who design the way the material.
Did you ever take like family vacations and go places? Or?
Yes, we used to go to the country to a kachalaim. A kachalaim is like a cottage that used to be rented by families in the Catskills. You had a bedroom, and kind of a community in Hurleyville,
Really?
New York. Hurleyville, New York.
Sure. It was right near us.
And it was lovely. We used to go on it was a real farm, and they just took in these summer boarders. And it was a working farm, and that was where I first got to see real live cows.
Did you milk a cow?
I knew there were cows. And we had hay rides, and we used to help, I don't know, I guess bring in the hay maybe. But we thought it was fun, and actually we were working very hard.
Right. Did you go there every year?
Yes. I think that we went there until, I guess I was about 5 or so. And at that point we graduated to a hotel. And we used to go to Gullub's. And the whole family went to Gullub's. All the aunts and the uncles and all the children went to Gullub's. And that's the way it was with the same people in the city as you saw up there. And it really was extended family.
So you had a favorite Aunt Mary. Did you have favorite cousins?
I had one cousin I adored. And I still adore him because I still see him. That was my cousin Lloyd. And my cousin Lloyd was the only child of my mother's youngest brother, who was called Gus. And he was a traveling salesman in it was handkerchiefs. Handkerchiefs were very big at that period of time. Nobody used Kleenex, they used handkerchiefs. So my Uncle Gus used to travel the country, coast to coast, selling. And that was my rich Uncle Gus. My rich Uncle Gus was married to my Aunt Sylvia, who was one of identical twins, who were so identical that nobody could tell the difference between them.
Who was her twin?
Her twin.
Who was her twin?
Her twin was called Evelyn, but Evelyn never had children. So she used to love my cousin Lloyd as though he were her own child. And as a result, he was spoiled rotten. But I loved him dearly. Lloyd is now living half the year in Israel and half the year in Florida. He became a gastroenterologist. That's what he became. Still practices and is as handsome as ever. Used to go car racing with Paul Newman and gave up car racing because the day he crashed his, I think it was a Ferrari, the day he crashed his Ferrari into a tree and his children got hysterical, he swore he wouldn't do that again. So he bought a Cessna and he used to fly instead. Right. My Bubba and Zeta used to own what was called a shank. A shank was essentially a tavern. I guess loosely it would translate to an inn because they also kept boarders, etc. My grandmother was a marvelous cook and baker. And my grandfather was, I guess, a very genial host. And they had this in Galicia. And the reason that they emigrated from Galicia to the United States was one day, as the story goes, a couple of Cossacks came into the tavern, and they were apparently doing things they should not have been doing, like making advances on all the girls, etc., etc. And my Aunt Molly, who was a very gutsy lady, picked up a frying pan and hit one of them over the head. They had 24 hours to leave Poland with whatever they could carry, which is the way they emigrated to America.
Did your grandparents live nearby you? Did you see them
Yes,
often?
they lived within 5 blocks. And as we moved out of an apartment, my mother, father, and brothers and sisters, they would move in. So that first they lived on South 5th Street and we lived on Division Avenue. We moved to Hooper Street. They moved to our apartment, our old apartment, on Division Avenue. So it was always like I had 2 homes.
Who were you named
to go
for?
between. I was named for my mother's grandmother, whose name was, well, it was Basha. And Basha translated is,
elementary school?
I guess, PS 16.
And that was in?
That was in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and across the street was someone who thought he was my boyfriend, Marvin Kaplan, who used to be very prominent in sitcoms, etc., etc. I think he's dead at this point, but I remember that he had a habit of just walking in without ringing the bell or opening the door, just right in. And my father used to invite him to leave like twice a day. But
junior high school?
junior high school was Junior High School 50, which is the first place because we had to walk there. We didn't take a trolley car or a bus or anything. We had to walk there. And one day walking to school, there was a tremendous commotion on the plaza, and there was police cars and ambulances, and it was the first time I ever saw, we'll never forget it, a dead man with his throat cut. That was a pretty tough neighborhood, and yet we kids walked through it every day and nobody bothered us. And no problem. High school, I started at Easton District High School, and I was a member of Arista. And then we bought the house in Flatbush, and so I had to change high schools. And I went to James Madison High, and I was in the Royal Oak School, which is the honors school section of the school. And then I graduated from there, and I first went to City College, and I was a chemistry major, because my brother, whom I adored, was a chemist. And then one day I had an accident in the lab, and I spilled a tube of aqua regia, which was nitric acid, and I grabbed it because it was turning over, and that was how I burnt my hands. P.S. I no longer was a chemistry major. And I switched from City College to Brooklyn College, and graduated from Brooklyn College.
And what year?
Oh, you don't want to know that.
I really do.
We really do.
Oh, God.
Right.
It was, if I am to tell the truth, I graduated in 47. And wanted to be a social worker. And so I was going to go on to Columbia, School of Social Work. And I took a job with the city as a social worker trainee. And I used to come home every night and cry. And my father said to me, if you continue this, you will wind up being a candidate for a rubber room. So he financed my business career. I went to a business school, Brown's Business Collegiate College on Madison Avenue in Manhattan. And I learned to be a bookkeeper. And Oh God, that was so long ago. I went to work as a bookkeeper, and I dropped out of Columbia, and that's just as well. I probably would have had a nervous breakdown if I had continued and been a social worker. But
I'm sorry.
no, but I wound up getting into business, and it was the die cutting business. I
What did you
got
like to do?
restless. Well, I was a dancer, ballroom dancing. And you could wake me at any time of day or night, and I would be raring to go. And then, of course, eventually I met Milt.
Where did you
Where?
meet him?
And Milt doesn't dance.
Where did you meet him?
I was very active in Jewish groups, and I met him at a meeting of the Labor Zionists, which was a group I belonged to. And once I met him, and I fell madly in love, it happened to be, I met him on a Labor Day weekend, the weekend that my father died. And as a result, we sat shiva for a week, and then for a month afterwards, we did not do anything, with music or entertainment. And once Milt and I had met, I dropped all of my other friends. I returned a ring that I had accepted from one guy, and we knew that this was going to be permanent for us. And I guess we were engaged for 4 years before we got married. And
And when you met Milt, what was he doing? Or did he
Milt
work
was a
for-
chemist, a
was
research chemist. Milt was a very good research chemist. His name is on patents, and a few years ago, I think probably 2 years after he died, I got a letter from a lawyer in Canada. They had been looking for him for a number of months, apparently, because a patent case that had been pending for years and years and years was finally settled, and I got a check as the executrix of the estate. Of course, it was in Canadian dollars, which are not exactly the same as American dollars, but it was nice.
What year did you get married?
52. And Milt died in 2000. Because Syl and Leo were going to give me away and to walk me down the aisle. Since she was due momentarily, we had to plan the wedding for when she was born, after she was born. And now that's a funny one.
So how did
Didn't think of that.
come about?
Milt was a research chemist, and a very good one. Unfortunately, Milt, as a research chemist, used to take, because he was so big and so strong, he used to do things that more properly should not have been done. Used to lift things and set up things that would normally have taken 3 or 4 people. He was able to do it himself. Well, he was working in a plant, and it was a chlorine plant. There was an explosion and a tremendous fire, and he pulled someone out of the plant because of the fire, who subsequently died in his arms. The damage that was done to his lungs because of the chlorine and the burning gases and the whatever was permanent, and so he developed a form of asthma which was so severe as to literally disable him. Certainly he could no longer operate as a chemist. And because this was a man at the peak of his powers. We needed something to do, so we got involved in a laundromat.
Dirty laundry.
Yeah, in a laundromat. And we gave that up after, I think, a period of like 12 years, when the woman who was cleaning and sitting at the place during the day was making more money out of it than we were. So we closed it down and walked away. And that was the end of the laundromat.
Where was the
Except for the coin. It was in what was called Middle Village, which is Woodhaven Boulevard and Elliott Avenue, right near the biggest shopping mall in Queens. But the shopping mall didn't come into being until maybe 5 years ago. Pity. I would have enjoyed it for a dress.
Do you remember your first
For a
kiss?
bride. Gowns, of course, always, but not for a dress. And I
Color.
couldn't find anything I liked. And I saw this and I loved it and I bought it. So there we are. Finished? Still going.
Are you finished?
When I was married in a gray silk dress. A dress, not a gown, but a very dressy one. And a hat with a veil, etc. And then when I was down in the ladies' room at Lucille's restaurant, which is where the wedding took place, the attendant there said to me, "Oh, are you with the wedding party?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, I said, "Yes, I'm the bride." And she looked at me. She wanted to know why I was wearing gray. And now that I look back on it, it was pretty funny. I don't know why I was wearing gray
Say,
either.
why were you wearing
Why
gray?
were you wearing?
Is there a reason you couldn't wear white?
Because it was just coming into fashion. No, I really don't. I really don't. Actually, I have to tell you, I graduated from high school at the age of 16. So I always traveled with an older set of people because I was so young. I graduated from college before I was 20. But though I was big and thought I was sophisticated and supposedly so smart, actually I've always been rather shy and certainly not very savvy in the ways of today's generations. No, I don't remember my first kiss. I had, because
What year was it first?
yeah, it was 52. Because my mother was a widow. My sister and brother-in-law gave me away. It was a very small wedding. My in-laws were ultra-Orthodox, and because of that, they gave me a choice of 2 places to get married at. Orthodox rules are you have to be married under an open roof and all kinds of things. In any event, one of the places was not available for when I wanted it, and the other place was, and that was Lucille's restaurant, which has since closed and gone out of business. But that's where I was married. I had a private chapel, and it was a nice wedding. Milton and I didn't eat anything at the wedding, and after that we went out and had Japanese food. A couple of months that we were married, we lived in a hotel in New York. It was right across from
And so you live where
Central
now?
Park West.
Kew
I
Gardens.
live in Kew Gardens.
And you've lived there for how many years?
Well, I've lived there since the building was opened. Oh God, that is 54 years. And when I think of how many moves all of my dear ones have had, this is the only apartment I've ever had. Which is certainly considering. Not really decided yet, but considering retiring. When, if, and as I do, I probably will get involved in working, obviously, as a volunteer, but probably working with possibility of Peace Corps work in the United States is a very real situation that I am going to look into. Oh, I'm going to walk in one day and someone's going to say something and I'm going to decide that this is it. Just pack it up and move on. Of course, it's difficult because I have done what I've been doing for so long. It's hard to let go of that and jump into a pool of unknown water. I love movies, but I like old ones. There are, you know, and I'm sorry to sound prim and proper, but some of these movies now embarrass me. It's not so much the language, although some of that does embarrass me, but some of the situations. I don't know, I guess growing up, when I did and as I did, there are some things that should be private, should not be spread on the screen, if you will. And I have actually walked out.
Bombing of Pearl Harbor. Do you remember where you were when that happened?
No, that happened when I was quite young. I really don't remember where I was. I do think that at that time we were living in Flatbush and I was going to James Madison. And I think that was when I got a little bit interested in going into politics. I never really did go too far with it. I joined the Democratic Party later on. And I had a friend who was active in politics upstate New York, my friend of Monticello, whom you remember.
Yeah.
And I went to a couple of conventions, and I did little things like stuffing envelopes and
All the
passing out
presidents
handbills.
that you've seen come and go, do you have a favorite president?
At one time, I think it used to be Roosevelt, but when all of those things came out about Roosevelt's behavior towards and against the Jews during the Second World War, I think that I was totally turned off. And to this day, my favorite and my most admired one is Harry Truman. And of course, had Adlai Stevenson ever made it, he would have been my man. I will never forget that. I was working in Long Island City, which is where we are now, and out of our windows we have 85,000 square feet, and we overlook the lower part of Manhattan. I still get choked up. We saw people jumping out of the windows. I will never forget it. Never.
What's your favorite book that you like to read, that you remember as being one of your favorite books, or do you have a favorite author?
Dickens. I go back and read him again and again and again, and even though it's so dated, it is so wonderful. It's a pleasure to read him.
What's your favorite color?
Well, it used to be black. Now I think it is purple. I love purple in all the shades. I love lilac, I love mauve, even love maroon. In truth, I think my most favorite food is probably, surprisingly, good bread.
Not surprising.
You cannot find it easily, but when you do, it is a joy. Been to Italy, been to Paris, but only for a very short period, layover on change of planes, etc. Israel, of course. England again, only on a stopover. I had been looking forward to going to Turkey. I have always wanted to go to Turkey.
You want to go?
And unfortunately, at this point when I have really no responsibilities and I'm footloose and fancy free, ideal time to go. It's not the place for a woman, a Jewish woman, alone, and senior type highlights to go. I was the first woman president of the graphic arts industry. I was the vice president of the Sales Association. And to the extent that I was a first, meaning a woman, in a lot of things, I guess it was good. These days, of course, there is no limit to what a woman can do or be.
That's true.
And, but you can't
Is
do
there
it.
anything you'd like to add? Something maybe
I
that
just-
nobody knows? A secret
Like
that
a
you
secret
have?
that you've never told anybody.
You never
You can
told
talk very
anybody?
privately to the camera.
We won't even listen.
Wait a minute, I was gonna walk out, but I'm coming back.
No, I don't think so. I have been in a lot of situations where I've been so naive that looking back on the situations, I am appalled. Except I came through them, I guess, because I was so naive and so innocent that nobody could believe it. And I was unscathed, untouched, and okay, coming through it. Just remember that people are what it's all about. You be nice to everybody, because you never know where the messenger that you were rude to may wind up being the president of the company that you're trying to get into. And that's it. C'est la vie. That's my life.